The silence was the worst part. For 3 months, the warning sirens had screamed their mechanical warnings across Kepler Station, but now even they had given up. Commander Velthara stood at the observation deck, her crystalline fingers pressed against the cold metal of the viewport. Through the reinforced glass, she could see them. Dozens of black ships moving in slow, patient circles around the station like hungry wolves. The Void Reapers had been out there for 92 days now. Velthara knew the exact count because she marked each day on her personal log. Watching their supplies dwindle with every sunrise that never came in the eternal darkness of space. Her people, the Zephyrians, were beings of living crystal who drew energy from light sources. The station's power grid had been reduced to emergency levels weeks ago, and she could feel her own inner glow growing dimmer each day. "Commander," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Lieutenant Kixel approaching, his 6 legs clicking against the metal floor. The Cathera officer's compound eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting, and his mandibles clicked nervously. "Narathi delegation is asking for another meeting about the food rationing." Velthara felt her internal light flicker, a sign of deep exhaustion that she couldn't hide from her subordinates anymore. 50,000 civilians from 3 different species were trapped on this station, all looking to her for answers. She didn't have. The Galactic authorities had abandoned them completely. The last communication from the Galactic Defense Force had been clear. Kepler Station was too far from the core worlds. It's too deep in hostile territory and too dangerous to attempt a rescue. "Tell them we'll meet in conference room 7 in 1 hour," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Zephyrian speech sound like distant music. "Lieutenant, have security increase patrols near the food storage areas? I heard there was another incident yesterday between the Cathera workers and some of the Narathi families." Kixel's antennae twitched with concern. "Yes, Commander. The stress is affecting everyone differently. The hive mind connection among my people is becoming unstable. Too much fear, too much uncertainty." After he left, Velthara made her way. Through the station's corridors, the walls showed signs of the siege, scorch marks from the initial attacks, hastily welded patches over hull breaches, and the ever-present smell of recycled air that had been recycled too many times. The lighting had been reduced to 30% of normal levels, casting everything in a dim, orange glow that made shadows dance at the edges of her vision. She passed through the residential sectors, where families from all 3 species had learned to live together in ways that would have been impossible before the crisis. Zephyrian children played with Cathara young ones, their natural barriers of language and culture broken down by shared hardship. But she could see the strain in their parents' faces, the way conversations stopped when she walked by, the worried glances toward the viewports. The Narathi quarters were in the lower levels, where the artificial gravity generators created the water-filled environment their people needed to survive. Velthara had to put on a breathing apparatus to enter their section. The corridors here flooded with the specially treated water that kept their gills functioning. The Narathi had adapted better than anyone to the cramped conditions, but even they were reaching their limits. Elder Tiderunner floated in the main gathering chamber, his massive form surrounded by dozens of his people. The old Narathi's bioluminescent patches pulsed in slow hypnotic patterns, a sign of deep distress in his species. When he saw Velthara approach, his speaking tendrils waved in greeting. "Commander," he said through his translator unit, the device crackling with static from overuse. "The water recyclers are failing. Our engineers have done everything they can, but the systems were never designed for this many people for this long. We have maybe 10 days before the water becomes toxic." Velthara nodded grimly. The Narathi weren't just talking about drinking water. They needed the liquid to breathe, to move, to live. Without clean water, they would suffocate in their own environment. "What about the emergency reserves?" "Already consumed," Tiderunner replied, his patterns shifting to deeper blues. "We've been rationing for weeks, but children need more water than adults. We couldn't let them suffer." The Kithera sections were the most crowded, their hive-like structures packed with beings who had never known individual privacy. But the collective consciousness that normally gave them strength had become a source of anxiety. Every worried thought was shared, every fear magnified across hundreds of minds. The worker drones moved with jerky, uncoordinated motions. their usual efficiency broken by the psychological strain Queen Mother. Zixvera met Velthera at the entrance to the main hive chamber. Unlike the other Cathera, she was larger, her carapace bearing the distinctive markings of her leadership caste. "The collective is fracturing," she said without preamble. "Too much stress, too much fear. The workers are beginning to act independently, fighting over resources. If this continues, we will lose cohesion entirely." Velthara understood the implications. The Cathora's greatest strength was their ability to work as one mind, but that same connection made them vulnerable to psychological breakdown. If they lost their collective consciousness, they would be no better than frightened animals. She made her way to the command center, where the senior staff maintained their constant vigil over the station's systems. The main display showed their situation in stark detail. Power at 22%. Food supplies enough for maybe 2 weeks, and the slow but steady approach of the Void Reaper fleet. The pirates weren't in any hurry. They knew time was on. Their side, Captain Mordain, her chief of security, looked up from the tactical display. The grizzled Zephyrian's crystal formations were scarred from old battles, and his light barely flickered anymore. They're moving closer again. 3 more. Ships dropped out of hyperspace this morning. They're not even trying to hide their intentions anymore. "How many ships total?" Velthera asked. 47 combat vessels, 12 support craft. If they wanted to destroy us, they could have done it months ago. They're waiting for us to surrender. Velthara knew what that meant. The Void Reapers weren't interested in destroying the station. They wanted its inhabitants alive. 50,000 civilians would bring a massive profit in the slave markets of the Outer Rim. The pirates were patient because they knew desperation would eventually do their work for them. The command center's communication array crackled to life, broadcasting the same message it had been sending for weeks. "This is Kepler Station, calling any vessel, any authority. We are under siege and require immediate assistance. 50,000 civilians in critical need, please respond." The message echoed into the void, as it had every day for 3 months. No one answered. No one was coming. Above them, the Void Reapers waited with predatory patience, their black ships a constant reminder that death was only a matter of time. The communication center of Kepler Station had become a graveyard of broken dreams. Dozens of failed attempts at long-range communication lay scattered across the floor, burned-out circuits, melted transmitter arrays, and the twisted remains of equipment that had been pushed far beyond its limits. But in the center of this technological carnage, a gene refused to give up. The young Narathi engineer floated in her specialized work tank, her gills filtering the recycled water as she concentrated on the impossible task before her. Her webbed fingers moved with delicate precision, connecting quantum transmitters to hyperspace relays in ways that violated every engineering manual in the galaxy. The components sparked and hissed as incompatible systems were forced to work together through sheer determination and creative desperation. "This is complete madness," muttered Clickavera from her perch on the ceiling. The Cathara drone's compound eyes tracked every movement, her forearms occasionally reaching down to hand Heijin the tools she needed. "Even if you somehow managed to boost the signal strength, who would answer? The galaxy is forgotten about." "Us completely." Heijin paused in her work, her bioluminescent patches flickering with exhaustion. She had been working for 18 hours straight, surviving on nothing but recycled water and the emergency nutrition packets that tasted like metal and despair. "Someone has to be listening out there," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Narathi's speech sound like flowing water. "Someone has to care about what happens to us." The improvised transmitter array looked like something from a fever dream. Crystalline Zephyrian memory cores had been wired to Cathara bioprocessors, which in turn fed into human-designed quantum broadcasters salvaged from the station's original communication system. It should not have worked. Every law of physics and engineering suggested it would explode the moment power was applied. But Jin had spent years studying the different technologies that made up the galactic community. She understood that while each species had developed their own approach to faster-than-light communication, the underlying principles were universal. Quantum entanglement was quantum entanglement, whether you were Zephyrian, Cathera, or human. Power. Levels are holding steady, Clickavera reported, her mandibles clicking nervously. But the quantum field generator is showing massive instability. If this thing overloads, it could take out half the communication deck. Then we better hope it works on the first try, Hajian replied, making final adjustments to the broadcast. Array. She had programmed the system to transmit on every emergency frequency known to the galactic community. Using every language and communication protocol in the station's database, if anyone was listening, they would hear Kepler stations. Desperate cry for help. The transmitter sparked to life with a sound like breaking glass. Energy coursed through the jury-rigged components, creating a light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The quantum field generator hummed with power, its crystalline structure glowing brighter than it had in months. For a moment, it seemed like the entire station held its breath. Then the message began to broadcast. The words were simple, transmitted simultaneously in dozens of languages. This is Kepler Station. 50,000 civilians under siege by Void Reaper forces. Food and power at critical levels. Please, anyone who receives this message, we need immediate assistance. The signal raced through hyperspace, carried by quantum entanglement across distances that would take years to travel at normal speeds. It spread outward from Kepler Station like ripples in a pond, searching for anyone who might be listening in the vast emptiness of space light years away. On a small monitoring station orbiting Earth, Lieutenant Commander Biorum was halfway through his third cup of coffee when the emergency alert sounded. The young officer nearly spilled his drink as he rushed to the communication console, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to isolate the signal from the background noise of space. The message was broken, damaged by its journey through the quantum foam of hyperspace. Fragments of alien languages mixed with universal distress codes, creating a puzzle that the translation computers struggled to solve. But even through the interference and static, one thing was clear. Somewhere in the galaxy, people were dying. Biorum's training kicked in as he began the standard protocol for emergency signals. He enhanced the audio, cleaned up the interference, and ran the message through every translation program available. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. Kepler Station. 50,000 civilians. Under siege. The words painted a picture of desperation that made his stomach clench. Within minutes, its signal had been forwarded to Fleet Command, where it landed on the desk of Admiral Junho aboard the flagship Indomitable. The grizzled veteran had been preparing for his morning briefing when the priority message arrived. Marked with the red banner that indicated a galactic emergency, Jun-Ho read the report twice, its weathered face growing more serious with each word. Around him, his staff officers gathered, their voices rising in heated discussion as they debated the implications of the message. Kepler's station was in the outer rim, deep in territory controlled by pirates and raiders. It was thousands of light years from the nearest friendly port, surrounded by hostile forces. "Sir," said Captain Minne, his aide-de-camp, "I've checked with Galactic Command. The Council has already written off Kepler Station as lost. Every military advisor says attempting a rescue would be suicide. The Third Fleet would be destroyed before we could even reach the station." The other officers nodded in agreement. Fleet regulations were clear. No mission should be attempted unless there was a reasonable chance of success. Sending the Third Fleet into the Outer Rim would be throwing away thousands of lives to save civilians. They had never met, but Junho was not thinking about regulations or reasonable chances. He was thinking about the desperation in that message. The voice of a young alien engineer who had risked everything to ask for help. He was thinking about 50,000 innocent people facing death or slavery at the hands of pirates. "Prep the Third Fleet for immediate departure," he said, his voice cutting through the arguments of his staff. "All ships, combat ready. We leave in 6 hours." The room fell silent. Captain Minne stepped forward, his face pale. "Sir, with respect, they're not even human. These are aliens we've never met, on a station we've never heard of. Why would we risk everything for them?" Junho stood up, his decision already made. In his mind, he could still hear the echo of that broken message, the plea for help that had traveled across the galaxy to reach them. "They asked for help," he said simply. "That's enough." The orders went out across the fleet, and within hours, ships that had been docked for maintenance were being prepared for combat. The Third Fleet would soon begin the longest rescue mission in human history. The bridge of the Void Reaper flagship Death's Embrace hummed with quiet anticipation. Reaper Lord Vexmoran stood before the massive viewing screen, his scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. Behind him, his crew moved with the practiced efficiency of predators who had hunted these space lanes for decades. Today would finally end the longest siege in Reaper history. "All vessels moved to final assault positions," Vexmoran commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. 47 combat ships began their slow advance toward Kepler Station, their weapons charging with deadly purpose. The pirates had been patient for 3 months, but patience had its limits. The civilians inside the station were weak, desperate, and ready to surrender. The tactical display showed their overwhelming advantage. The station's defenses had been reduced to almost nothing. Their power grid was failing, their weapons offline, their shields flickering like dying candles. It would be over in minutes. "Sir," reported his communications officer, a thin man with cybernetic implants replacing half his face. "The station is broadcasting surrender terms. They're asking for safe passage for their civilians." Vexmoran laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Tell them they will get the same mercy they gave to our brothers at Proxima Station." "None at all." The Reaper fleet moved closer, their black holes reflecting the distant stars. Each ship was a weapon of terror, designed to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw them. They had never failed to claim their prize. Today would be no different. "All vessels, prepare for final assault on my command," Vexmoran said, raising his hand to give the order that would seal the fate of 50,000 innocent lives. Then, reality exploded. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear apart as massive ships burst through hyperspace in a display that defied every law of physics the pirates understood. The newcomers appeared not in neat formations or organized battle lines, but scattered across multiple vectors like seeds thrown by a giant hand. Some ships materialized so close to Kepler Station that their hulls nearly scraped the station's outer ring. Others appeared directly behind Reaper vessels, their weapons already charging. On the bridge of the Death's Embrace, alarms screamed warnings as the tactical display tried to process what it was seeing. The computer systems had never been programmed to handle this kind of chaos. Ships appeared from hyperspace at impossible angles, their approach vectors making no sense according to standard galactic tactics. "What in the void is happening?" Vexmoran snarled, his confidence evaporating as he watched his perfectly planned assault dissolve into confusion. Commander Velthara pressed her face against the observation deck window, her crystalline heart racing as she watched the impossible sight before her. The newcomer ships were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were scarred and battle-worn, their hulls bearing the marks of countless conflicts. But there was something beautiful about the way they moved, something that reminded her of a dance rather than a military maneuver. "Unknown vessels. This is Commander Velthara of Kepler Station," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Please identify yourselves." The response came immediately, spoken in accented galactic standard with a warmth that made her internal light flicker with hope. "Kepler Station. This is Admiral Junho of the Terran Third Fleet. We received your message. Sorry we took so long to get here, Terran." The word meant nothing to most of the galaxy, but Velthara had studied the newer species in the galactic community, humans, the young race that had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. They were supposed to be primitive. It's barely advanced enough to leave their home system. But the ships surrounding Kepler Station told a different story. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of crews who had trained together for years, their weapon systems charged with mechanical precision. But there was something else in their movements, a fierce determination that made Velthara's crystal formations resonate with unexpected emotion. Captain Dehayan commanded the destroyer Soul's Pride, and his ship was already diving toward the nearest Reaper cruiser before the enemy could react. His crew worked with the smooth coordination of a machine, but their faces showed something that the pirates had never seen before in their victims' joy. Pure, fierce joy at the chance to fight for something bigger than themselves. Target there. Weapon systems first, Dehine ordered, his voice calm, despite the chaos around them. We want to disable them, not destroy them. There might be prisoners aboard. The Soul's Pride opened fire with a precision that stunned the Reaper crew. Their shots found every weak point in the enemy ship's armor, systematically destroying weapons arrays and engine systems while leaving the crew compartments intact. It was surgical warfare, conducted with a skill that spoke of years of training and experience, but it was the human tactics that truly shocked the Void Reapers. These were not the rigid formations and predictable maneuvers they had faced from other galactic navies. Human ships broke every rule of engagement, ramming enemy vessels, while their crews evacuated through emergency airlocks. Fighter squadrons abandoned their attack runs to shield civilian transports that were trying to escape the battle zone. On the Reaper flagship, Exmorin watched in growing horror as his carefully planned assault crumbled. His ships were veteran pirates hardened by decades of successful raids, but they had never faced an enemy like this. The humans fought with a reckless bravery that bordered on insanity, throwing themselves into harm's way to protect people they had never met. All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship, Vexmorin ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. Bring down their command ship, and they'll scatter like frightened animals. But the human ships didn't scatter. Instead, they moved closer together, their formation tightening as they prepared to defend their admiral. The Indomitable continued to advance through the storm of enemy fire, shields flaring with each impact but never faltering. Marine boarding pods, launched from human ships while their parent vessels were still under heavy fire. The small craft dodged between laser beams and missile explosions, their pilots showing a skill that made veteran pirates shake their heads in disbelief. These humans were either completely crazy or completely fearless. Lieutenant Soman piloted her boarding pod toward a Reaper frigate, her hands steady on the controls despite the weapons fire all around her. Behind her, 24 Marines checked, their equipment one final time, their faces grim with determination. They had come across the galaxy to save strangers, and they would not fail now. The chaos of battle spread across the space around Kepler Station. But for the first time in 3 months, the defenders had hope. The impossible had happened. Someone had answered their call for help, and they had brought the storm of war with them. The battle had turned the space around Kepler Station into a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams. Sergeant Eugen moved through the corridors of the captured Reaper boarding craft with the deadly grace of a predator, her rifle raised and ready. Behind her, 6 Marines followed in perfect formation, their boots making no sound on the blood-stained deck plates. They had done this same deadly dance 12 times already in the past hour. Board the enemy ship, clear out the pirates, secure any prisoners, and move on to the next target. Each boarding action was a gamble with death, but the Marines had volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. Somewhere in the galaxy, innocent people were suffering, and that was enough reason to fight. Surge Team Alpha, we have discovered alien prisoners in Section C. Her radio crackled with static. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Kimsu, whose team had boarded a Reaper frigate on the other side of the battle zone. They appear to be Nerothi civilians, but they're in bad condition. Eugene felt her jaw tighten with anger. The Reapers had been taking hostages during their raids, using innocent civilians as bargaining chips or selling them into slavery. We're moving to your position now, she replied, signaling her squad to follow her toward the ship's cargo bay. The corridors of the Reaper vessel were a maze of darkness and danger. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the air smelled of burned circuits and fear. The pirates had abandoned this section of the ship when the Marines boarded, but Eugene knew they could be hiding anywhere, waiting for a chance. To strike back, they found the prisoners in the ship's main cargo hold. The sight made Eugene's stomach turn with disgust. Dozens of Nerothi civilians floated in crude metal tanks filled with murky water that barely kept their gills functioning. The water was stale and contaminated, barely breathable for the aquatic aliens who needed clean liquid to survive. Corporal Hai-1 was already moving among the prisoners, her medical scanner beeping as she checked their vital signs. The young medic had spent months studying alien biology, preparing for missions exactly like this one. Her equipment had been hastily modified to work with non-human physiology, but she knew enough to recognize the signs of severe dehydration and poisoning. "They're in terrible condition," Hai-1 reported, her voice tight with professional concern. "The Reapers have been keeping them alive, but just barely. Another few days and many of them would have died." Eugen approached the nearest tank, where an elderly Nerathi floated with his bioluminescent patches flickering weakly. The alien's eyes were clouded with pain and exhaustion, but they focused on her with desperate hope when she knelt beside his improvised prison. "Can you move?" Eugen asked through her universal translator, the device converting her words into the musical language of the Nerathi. "We're here to rescue you, but we need to get you to safety." The elderly alien's mouth opened and closed silently for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You came for us," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of the ship's failing life support systems. "But we are not your people. We are strangers to you." Eugen felt something stirred deep in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. She had joined the Marines to protect humanity, to defend Earth and its colonies from those who would harm them. But looking at this old alien, she realized that the definition of her people had somehow expanded to include anyone who needed help. "You are now," she said simply, reaching into the tank to help him into the evacuation pod that would carry him to safety. "You called for help and we answered. That makes you family." While the Marines worked to rescue the prisoners, the space battle above them reached its most desperate moment. Admiral Junho's flagship, the Indomitable, traded massive blows with the Reaper dreadnought Death's Embrace, neither ship willing to give ground. The two vessels circled each other like ancient warriors, their weapons lighting up the darkness. With deadly beauty, on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Junho watched the tactical display with the calm focus of a man who had seen 1,000 battles. Around him, his crew worked with mechanical precision, but he could see the strain in their faces. They had been fighting for hours, and the enemy was not giving up easily. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported his damage control officer." "Losing atmosphere fast?" "Seal it off," Junho ordered, without taking his eyes off the main screen. "All available power to forward shields." But even as his flagship dueled with the enemy command ship, Junho could see that the tide of battle was turning in their favor. Across the battlefield, human ships were demonstrating tactics that the galaxy had never seen before. They didn't fight like machines following programming or like computer systems executing code. They fought like people protecting their families with a fierce determination that made them unpredictable and dangerous. Captain Yunsu's destroyer, the Busan Thunder, had lost half its weapons and was venting atmosphere through multiple hull breaches. Any sane commander would have withdrawn to fight another day, but Yunsu was not thinking about retreat. Her sensors showed that the Reaper flagship was moving toward Kepler Station, preparing for a final desperate ramming attack. That would destroy the civilian habitat. "All power to engines," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Take us directly into their path." Her crew looked at her with expressions of shock and admiration. They understood what she was asking them to do. The Asterisk Busan Thunder Asterisk was heavily damaged, but it was still a warship with thousands of tons of mass and momentum. If they could intercept the Reaper flagship, they might be able to stop it from reaching the station. The destroyer accelerated toward the enemy dreadnought, its hull groaning under the stress of emergency acceleration. Yunsu's crew remained at their posts, their faces grim with determination. They had come here to save innocent lives, and they would not fail now, even if it cost them everything. The collision was visible across the entire battle zone, a brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the stars themselves. When the glare faded, both ships were severely damaged, but the Reaper flagship had been knocked off course. Atler Station was safe, at least for the moment. "All ships concentrate fire on the flagship," Admiral Junho ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet communications network. "End this now." The combined barrage from the human fleet lit up the darkness like a new star being born. Dozens of ships focused their weapons on the crippled Reaper dreadnought, their coordinated attack, overwhelming the enemy's defenses. When the light finally faded, the Death's embrace was breaking apart, its crew abandoning ship and escape pods. The remaining pirate vessels, seeing their leader's defeat, began to scatter in all directions. Their morale was broken, their formation shattered. The siege of Kepler Station was over, and the storm had passed. The medical bay aboard Kepler Station had transformed into something that would have been impossible just days before. Dr. So-young moved between patients with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent her entire career treating the wounded. But now she was working alongside beings she had only read about in textbooks. Zephyrian healers used their natural ability to generate healing light, their crystalline hands glowing as they helped accelerate the recovery of injured tissue. The translator units mounted on the walls created a constant background chatter as medical terms were converted between species, creating a hopeful symphony of cooperation. Across the room, Cathara drones worked alongside human corpsemen, there, for arms making them surprisingly effective nurses. They could hold medical instruments, monitor vital signs, comfort patients, and record data all at the same time. The collective consciousness that had once been a source of anxiety during the siege now became a blessing, allowing the Cathara medical staff to coordinate their efforts with perfect precision. Patient in Bay 7 needs another dose of pain. Medication, called out Corporal Haiwan, who had become an expert in alien physiology through necessity. She was treating a Nerathai child whose gills had been damaged by the poor water quality in the Reaper prison ship. The young alien's parents floated nearby, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with gratitude and relief. Dr. So-young nodded and moved to prepare the medication. The past 3 days had been a crash course in multi-species medicine, but she had learned that pain was universal, regardless of whether a patient had skin, scales, or crystalline formations. The desire to help others heal was something that transcended the boundaries between species. Commander Althera found Admiral Junho in the observation deck, standing alone as he watched the human fleet conduct search and rescue operations. Among the debris field, the aftermath of the battle had left space around Kepler Station littered with the wreckage of both human and Reaper vessels. But the human crews were methodically searching every piece of metal for survivors. The human Admiral looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Velthara recognized the expression from her own mirror during the siege. It was the kind of deep weariness that came from carrying the weight of command. From making decisions that meant life or death for thousands of people. Your losses, Velthara said quietly, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics of sorrow. 7 ships destroyed, over 3,000 casualties. Why did you come here? We are complete strangers to you. Junho remained silent for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched a human rescue shuttle pull survivors from the wreckage of a Reaper frigate. Even now, his people were risking their lives to save the enemy, pirates who had tried to destroy Kepler Station. My grandfather fought in the last war on Earth, he said finally. Before we reached the stars, before we knew there were other species out there, he told me something that I never forgot. The Admiral turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the lights of the rescue operations. He said that the true measure of a civilization is not how it treats its own people, but how it treats strangers who can give nothing in return. When we received your distress signal, we had a choice. We could have ignored it, told ourselves that it was not our problem, but that would have made us less than we could be. Velthara studied the human's face, trying to understand the mindset that had driven his people to cross the galaxy for aliens they had never met. Your people are unique, she said, her crystalline form catching and reflecting the light from the rescue operations outside. The galaxy has never seen anything like you. Most species look inward, protecting their own interests above all else. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs, Junho replied, turning back to watch his crew's work. Something different. Something that still believes in impossible things like hope and sacrifice for others. In the weeks that followed, the rescue of Kepler Station became more than just a military victory. It became a legend that spread across the galaxy. The story traveled through hyperspace communications, told in dozens of languages across hundreds of worlds. Traders carried the tale to distant markets. Diplomats discussed it in council chambers. And children heard it as a bedtime story on planets that had never known war. But it was not just the tactical brilliance or the fierce courage that captured imaginations across the galaxy. It was the simple, incomprehensible fact that humanity had traveled thousands of light years to save people they had never met, asking for nothing in return. Other species had fought great battles and won impressive victories, but no one had ever done what the humans had done, risk everything for strangers. The physical reconstruction of Kepler Station took months, but the emotional healing began immediately. The children of the station became symbols of the new reality that was emerging. Safarian youngsters played games with Narathi children in the flooded recreation areas, their laughter creating ripples in the water. Kithara drones taught human children how to work together as a team, while young humans showed their alien friends games that had been played on Earth for generations. The rebuilt recreation areas echoed with sounds that had been impossible during the siege. The sound of happiness, of hope, of a future that seemed brighter than anyone had dared to imagine. The corridors that had once known only fear now rang with the voices of children from 4 different species, all growing up together as friends. They were watched over by guards of all species, standing side by side in uniforms that had been redesigned to accommodate the physical differences between humans, Zephyrians, Narathi, and Kithara. Their differences, which had once been sources of tension and misunderstanding, had become their greatest strength. Each species brought unique abilities and perspectives that made the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Captain Dehayan had volunteered to remain at Kepler Station as part of the permanent garrison, along with several other human officers. He found himself working closely with Commander Velthera, learning about Zephyrian culture while teaching her about human tactical methods. Their partnership became a model for cooperation that other species began to study and emulate. Far across the galaxy, on worlds that had never heard of Earth or humans, beings looked up at the stars with new curiosity. News of the rescue had reached even the most remote planets, carried by traders and travelers who could not stop talking about the strange new species that had appeared from nowhere to save strangers. In the council chambers of the Galactic Federation, elderly diplomats who had spent centuries negotiating treaties and trade agreements found themselves discussing something unprecedented, species that seemed to value the lives of others above their own interests. The implications were staggering, and no one was quite sure what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. The storm had passed, but its echoes would be felt for generations to come. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy not through conquest or intimidation, but through an act of pure compassion that defied everything the other species thought they knew about civilized behavior.